Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of
the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everyone into Garden of Doom, and we're happy this week to have our friend Darius Kamali in again from the Persian Version podcast. Also, he hosts a very successful Facebook group, and he's an author. He's been on twice before. He's going to be on again also pretty soon. We're going to schedule him to do a sort of a different viewpoint on the Kurdish people in answer to a show that was on, I think, Garden Views. I'm not even really sure, but on Kurdistan with Mike Hilliard. So before we get too started in that, first I want to wish a happy birthday to my youngest son. I won't say his name so that he doesn't get doxxed, but happy birthday in case you're listening, and happy birthday to Elvis, because I think it's his birthday as well. Darius, how are you today?
Happy birthday to Elvis. My gosh. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing just fine. To the audience, neither Darius nor I are at 100%. We will try to bring our A games. Darius has been fighting a ailment for over a week now, and he's mostly won his battle, but it's still lingering. I, in true Jekyll and Hyde form, last night was embracing my Mr. Hyde, and I was at an independent wrestling show in Hamburg, Pennsylvania, which is about 2 hours away. And of course, I got home late and was screaming and yelling and making a nuisance of myself as usual. So I might be a little bit scratchy too, but today's episode is going to go to, well, what Darius's specialty is, and that is all things Iranian, Persian folklore. He's made it very clear that Iran's always been the country. Persia is a language, and there's plenty of other peoples that were in those areas who are historically significant as well. I mean, everybody's significant, but they made it into most everyone's history books, or in Bible studies. The Chaldeans, the Medes, the Medians, the Parthians, of course. And of course, parts of Babylon, and Samaria, and all sorts of other fun stuff. So, I've talked a lot. Darius, how are you today? And tell us on this adventure you're going to take us on today.
Good. Yeah. So, yeah, we had. I think you had noticed some posts on my Facebook group about mythological creatures.
Absolutely did.
Iranian/Persian or Iranian mythological creatures, and you were very interested in those. And of course, it would be ideal if one of these days either you or I do a YouTube so we can put up visuals. But but I'll do my best to give your audience an introduction to Iranian mythology and mythological creatures. Very superficial, of course, because this is a vast galaxy, a realm that encompasses multiple, ethnicities and civilizations and eras. So I'm only going to be hopefully whetting your audience's appetite.
Yes, and that's good. This is like a 101 to 201 primer, on heroes, folklore, and yeah, this is not a substitute for full education. But like you said, whetting their appetite and maybe introducing people to things they didn't know about, and maybe we'll even see some similarities with, figures and archetypes from around the world, and people can start, seeing what I see in sort of comparative. I'll just say mythology, just to keep it simple, but in all ologies, really.
I'm glad you put it that way. In fact, I want to start with that as the sort of the definition of mythology, right? Because it's used differently. I'm using it in the sense that the late Joseph Campbell understood it, not as something that's false or incorrect, the way, often in popular parlance we say, well, that's not true, it's just a myth, right? Mythology, in the way I'm using the word, refers to stories, parables, characters that actually convey spiritual or ethical or psychological truths. So myth in this sense isn't inherently any less true than, let's say, poetry is less true than prose, right? It's another way of communicating through parable, metaphor, so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
Having said that, Iranian mythology, so what is that? Persian mythology. I know in the West those terms are used interchangeably, and, because that's become so common, I do the same oftentimes.
Sure.
Although, to be accurate, Persian mythology is a subset of Iranian mythology. And Iranian mythology is itself a branch of the larger Indo-European mythological family.
Absolutely.
Right? Yep. And that's where we have to situate it. And as such, it shares a lot of primordial, you could say, features with other Indo-European cultures, including the Vedic tradition of India to its east, as well as the Greco-Roman, Germanic, Slavic, Celtic traditions on the European side of that Indo-European ethno-linguistic cultural superfamily, you could say. There's a lot of similarities, but in addition to being part and parcel of that larger complex, it is also, it does certainly have some radically novel, unique characteristics that set it apart from its other cousins, either to the east or to the west. And one of those comes from, what I call the Zoroastrian revolution, right? Mm-hmm. The Zoroastrian doctrine is radical in a number of ways. And the first is that it proposes that the world that we live in is not a perfect preordained system in which the best that humans can do is to live in harmony and obedience with some fixed, fatalistic, predetermined order of things that's set up by God or gods or by nature or by fate. What's known as, perennial philosophy, it's called sometimes. Instead, Zoroaster's message is actually the stark opposite of that. It's in opposition to what he would consider the tyranny of the old fatalistic, deterministic order and the so-called gods. Very different than, what the New Age movement would say, that you need to be in harmony with. No. In Zoroaster's view, which permeates Iranian mythology, you need to perfect the world. You need to change and improve not only yourself, but the natural order of things. So it's singular in that sense. Zoroaster, I should say, inverts the Indo-European pantheon that was prevalent in all of these Indo-European cultures, also even in Iranian culture itself prior to Zoroaster, in India, in all the European cultures, where he champions the Titans, or Ahuras, as the Indians and the Iranians would call it, Titans in the Greek version, who are on the side of helping and empowering mankind over the devas, or the gods, who are bent on controlling and enslaving mankind. So you don't so much worship Ahura Mazda, the god of Zoroastrianism, as he is really more like a friend. You can choose to join him in this struggle of good versus evil, the evil eagle, good versus evil, or not. Ahura Mazda is not some anthropomorphized deity, but a very abstract metaphor for wisdom or knowledge itself. It's almost like the beginnings of philosophy. In fact, there's a term in Zoroastrianism called Mazda Yasna. The word Mazda Yasna in the ancient Avestan language used in the scriptures of Zoroastrianism, very close to Sanskrit, by the way, is translated best as love of wisdom in English. And so it's not a coincidence that, Greeks began to use essentially the same word, philosophy, philosophy, which also means love of wisdom, while under Persian colonization. When certain Greek philosophers like Heraclitus, particularly, and Pythagoras were heavily influenced by Zoroastrian thought. And in fact, Pythagoras studied for 12 years in Babylon, which was the capital of the Persian Empire in the time, with Zoroastrian magi. Another sort of very key theme that we're going to encounter in order to understand these myths is dualism. Again, Ahura Mazda versus Ahriman, which is sort of God versus the devil. Sapanta Minu, which represents progressive aspect of our psyche, if you want to talk about it in Jungian terms, versus Angra Minu, the constricting aspect, so on and so forth. In short, good versus evil. And therefore, Zoroastrianism allows for a more, you could say, cogent notion of free will, something that would simply not be logically possible if God was both omniscient and omnipotent and, well, three things, and omnipresent. How could he allow for evil to exist, right?
Right.
Well, Zoroastrianism sort of bypasses that because it's, well, God is not all powerful. There's God and there's a devil, and you must choose between the two to help God win. And the outcome depends on our, collective choices. So it's, within this context and this sort of ethos that the mythological creatures, whether the good ones or the bad ones, the heroes and the villains of Iranian mythology have to be sort of situated and understood.
Gotcha. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And so, very Star Wars in a way, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, for those of you who want to hear more about Zoroastrianism, Darius actually did a great exposition on both Zoroastrianism and Mithras, which are tied together in the episode on Guardian of Doom called the Persian version. I think it's only fair also to mention that Darius has a podcast called the Persian version, which is why I got so clever with the name of my episode. So if you want even more details and more things Persian and Persian related, you may want to check out his show, which you could hear the whole catalog in one day if you wanted to, because I think there's about 15 episodes, so it's easy to catch up on as well, and very informative, interesting stuff, and varied as well.
So thank you for that plug.
Of course.
There, and I will say a couple more words about this before getting into the creatures themselves. Again, in this ethos or in this mythos, or whichever you want to call it, the job of humans then is to take an imperfect world that contains copious amounts of both good and not so good, and not to learn to fatalistically accept it. Or be in harmony with it, as hippies or New Age people today would say. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying this is a different viewpoint.
Sure.
But to transform it, and through our free conscious choices, actions, and words. In fact, one of the sort of catchphrases of Zoroastrianism is good thoughts, good words, good deeds, and turn this sort of imperfect pardon my French, but shit show of a world into something that in Old Persian, the Old Persian language was called Paradisia, which, as you can hear, is the source of many of the Western words, essentially meaning paradise.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. It's a word that was translated into Greek. It went from Paradisia to Paradisa. It's the same word. So we're all essentially heroes of our own fate. Men and women are central heroes of their own stories, not here to worship gods, but to transform ourselves and transform nature itself into this concept of paradise. So in a sense, it's both, I would say, existentialist. I know that's an anachronistic term, but maybe proto-existentialist in the sense that you have to choose. And it's utopian, right? Because it's all about improvement, both of yourself and of nature, rather than being in harmony with the sources. So now, where does Persian or Iranian mythology come from? Many sources, of course. It's been influenced by a lot of groups around it and that have conquered it, that it's conquered, so on and so forth. But the two main sources are first the Zoroastrian texts, which include the Avesta, the Gathas, and the Bundahisht. And then the second source is much later. It's from the 10th century AD. It's the Shahnameh, which is translated as the Book of Kings or the Chronicle of Kings. And that is sort of the epic poem. It's the world's longest poem written by a single author. It's sort of what in the Iranian world, to the Iranian world, is the equivalent of Homer's Odyssey and Iliad.
Right.
Or what the Bhagavad Gita, would be in the Indian side. And the Shahnameh has been described as sort of the founding text of Iranian civilization. And to give you a little context of what it is and what it's about and how it came to be, Iran had been conquered by the Muslim Arabs in the 7th century, and was at great risk of disappearing from history altogether. Its Zoroastrian history, its Indo-European ethos, and becoming another so-called Arab country, just like Egypt became, just like Syria and Iraq became, so on and so forth, all of North Africa. These are also cultures that predated Islam by millennia, but became absorbed into it, mostly because they adopted the religion and also they adopted the language, the Arabic language. Ferdowsi, the author of the Shahnameh, or Perdowsi, his name is actually related to that same word, Paradija.
Oh.
In a sense, helped to both revitalize and preserve the pre-Islamic culture of Iran, and also preserve the Persian language from disappearing. And to this day, that's probably why Iran is not an Arab country. It's not called an Arab country, whereas, let's say, Syria or Lebanon, which also had their older traditions, are considered Arab countries because it never adopted the Arabic language.
Right.
And that was largely due to this book, the Shahnameh. Again, the world's longest epic poem, and he went to great lengths to use almost no Arabic loanwords and revitalize the Persian language. So those are the two sources of Iranian and Persian myths. So what do these myths consist of? I want to talk about a few different categories today. First off, dragons.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, you like dragons, right?
Sure.
Which are known in the Iranian context as Aji Dahaka. Then there are Devs. If that sounds like the word devil, that's not a coincidence. Devas, Devs, these are all, again, Indo-European cognates.
Nice.
There's the Manticore. Then there are something called the Paris in Persian, or Peris. If it sounds like fairies, again, no coincidence.
Gotcha.
The P and F, are interchangeable.
Yeah. Pater and father. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing. there is a lot of gigantic sort of birds, but the two that I'll mention are the Seamorg bird, and the Homa bird. And then I'll also give you 4 or 5 examples of sort of humanoid heroes. One is Jamshid, one is Rostam, the other one is Kaveh the blacksmith. There's a very famous female one called Gorda Farid.
Ooh.
And we'll end with Arash Kamangir, because he shares my first name is actually Arash. Darius is my screen name.
Oh, breaking news.
Oh, I thought you knew. I had mentioned it on the site before, but
you probably have. The amount of things I forget on a daily basis would scare most people.
Yeah, when I write an article or in my books, I either put Arash Darius Kamali or A Darius Kamali.
Ah.
Everyone who knows me knows what the A stands for.
Gotcha.
Okay, so the first one is the dragon, or the Azi Dahaka. And the dragon is thought by some scholars to actually represent Ahriman, the devil. It's often described as having 3 mouths, 6 eyes, 3 heads. It's cunning, it's strong, it's demonic. Also has some human qualities, though. It's not just a beast, it's intelligent.
Right.
Also appears in other Indo-European traditions, of course. In modern Persian, the word is pronounced Ejdeha. In Armenian, it's Ajdahak. In Tajik Persian, it's Ajdaha. In Urdu, it's Ajdaha again. In Kurdish, it's Ejidaha. And in Slavic, which is not Ironic, but it's an Indo-European cousin, it's Ajdaja.
Now, wasn't it like something like 8 or 10,000 years ago, Enwi the twin?
What is that?
Wasn't the 3-headed snake with the 3 mouths, 6 eyes that became there was like sort of the proto serpent dragon? Wasn't the twin? Wasn't it like Enwi or something like that?
I hadn't heard that one. But yeah, do you know what is that from a Mesopotamian tradition?
I think it's older. I think it's listen, according to what I remember, which I'm already hitting the zeros, right? I'm throwing all strikes here. I'm
sure you're right. I just hadn't heard of it.
I think it's from sort of that region, between the Black and Caspian Seas and into the the steppes a little bit east of that, into what I guess now is Kazakhstan.
Yeah. So you're talking about the Indo-Europeans again, the homeland of the these are the terms that I know, but it's probably exactly the same thing.
Like there was Trito the warrior who had to defeat Enwi the serpent and called upon like the thunder god to help or something like that.
Yeah, no, this sounds absolutely part of the same Indo-European tradition. There's the dragons, and there's, the Sky Father, in the Greek version becomes Zeus, Indra in the Indian. Yeah, but so the dragon is sort of an essential part of not just Iranian mythology, but as I mentioned at the beginning, Iranian is a part of the larger Indo-European culture complex, and it seems to be prevalent throughout, from the westernmost regions of Europe all the way through to North India. And as you see, even the names, at least in the Iranian realm, are very similar to each other. And there's also, we actually talked about this very briefly in one of our previous conversations. There's the dragon banner. The Ajidahaka is also a war banner that was carried by the Scythians and Sarmatians when they went into war, and to the extent that it was associated, they were sometimes called the Dragon People. It's possibly because they wore green and had scale armor, but it's also possibly because they carried this dragon banner.
Or both.
Yeah. And there's also a dinosaur family that's named after this Ajidahaka. It's called, let's see if I can pronounce it here, the Ajdarkid group of pterosaurs are named after the Ajidahaka, the Azdarkin.
Well, that seems right.
Yeah. So, I'm sure they looked very similar.
Yeah, probably
there's
so.
other, dragons also in the Iranian tradition. Let's see if any of these are the ones you talk about. There's the Aussie Shruvara, which is a horned dragon. There's the Aussie Zarita, which is a yellow dragon.
Ooh.
I don't know what power the yellow dragon has that's different than the others, but the Azzy Rosita, the red dragon. Azzy Visapa, which is a poisonous dragon. And there's a dragon, I like this one, called Vurukasha, which is a dragon that can swallow 12 provinces at once.
And well, there's that number 12 again, and I don't know what's special about the colors either, but I mean, it might be important or related to if you go just a little bit further east into, Chinese and other traditions there's the 5 dragons and they all have different colors, or the 4 dragons and they all have different colors, and it's, very relevant there. And the dragons are, are viewed probably different there than definitely different. And luckily enough, we have a show on that on Chinese magic and mythology, which are actually one and the same. And so you can check that out too. But it's interesting. These are the kind of connections, because I mean, we really don't know what came first and who came first and who went where. I mean, we think we do, but that's constantly, that's always changing.
Ever shifting, yeah. I was going to say, apparently diversity was important in the dragon world as well.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, that's right. Dragon lives matter.
Dragon life, indeed. Okay, so that's the dragons are an enormous part of Iranic mythology and Indo-European mythology as a whole. Then you have another class of creatures.
Wait, before we go ahead, do you think that the dragon being so associated with the Sarmatians and the Scythians, and that they were sort of knocking on the door of the Proto-Europeans and the Europeans, might be why you have so much imagery of Christianity defeating the dragon? That might be the origin of that.
Absolutely, no, absolutely. Well, I think that those medieval European cultures were part of this Indo-European complex, of course, long before Christianity came, and so it was infused into their different cultures in a sense. But in the medieval period, you have. In fact, I'll get to that in a section I'm about to talk to, where There's a specific creature called the manticore, which appears in medieval bestiaries all the time.
Right.
And we think it may have to do either specifically with the Sarmatian Scythians or just more broadly with the Celtic Germanic version of the same Indo-European tradition.
Yeah, and I want to let everyone know
which one came first. It's a constant battle. It has to do with current politics and current various nationalisms, but it seems like they're all, ultimately from the same source here.
That's cool. And I just want to let the audience know, I always get manticores and basilisks confused. So I'm just like, if I get a trait, if I interrupt or interject and get a trait wrong with one, that's just me being me.
Perfect. So now there's the another class of creatures called the Deves, or similar to the word devas on the Indian side or devils on the European side.
Right.
They're not dragons. They look sort of human. They look like a human, but they're gigantic. They're large, 12-foot tall sort of humanoids with 2 horns on their heads, teeth like tusks of a boar.
Okay.
It's said. They're powerful. They're cruel. They're cold-hearted. They have a particular relish for the taste of human flesh.
Of course.
And some of them use sort of primitive weapons like stones and clubs, and others are pictured, with sophisticated armor, wearing full-on chainmail or scale mail like some sort of Persian or Parthian or Scythian knight. They're, despite their, I guess you could say, uncouth appearance, and in addition to their physical strength, some of them are sorcerers. So some of them know how to use magic. It's not just brute strength, and they can afflict their victims with horrific nightmares.
What are their origins? Or are they just always been here like the dragons were always here, or are they like a Nephilim Anunnaki kind of story that they're sort of offspring of humans and gods gone wrong?
In the Iranian tradition, there's a theory that with Zoroaster inverting the Indo-Iranian pantheon, turning it on its head, the devas in the Indic side are gods. They're not evil creatures. So it's like Zoroaster turning it around just to give them a middle finger and say, we're going to turn your devas into demons. But I don't think it's just for no reason either. It's the Zoroastrian ethos that these gods that want us to worship them are sort of the demiurge. They're not. They're here to oppress us, and instead we should side with the Titans or the Ashuras, who are here to empower humanity with wisdom and knowledge and techne. And very, to use Dr. Giorgiani's phraseology on this, what's the term? The Greek term of the god that brings fire to mankind and knowledge.
Prometheus.
Promethean.
Yeah,
very Promethean in that sense. Different word, but the same sort of concept.
Very cool.
Now, these Devas, of course, I mentioned how powerful they are, but they're not invincible. They can be defeated by the right hero or the right sorcerer. It's difficult.
Like the Wendigo.
Yeah. These legends of Devas also spread into some of the other sort of Iranian-influenced regions, like Armenia, of course, and the Turkic countries. Like the Turkic peoples came later from Mongolia. They also adopted this sort of whole cloth. Also in the Balkans, particularly in Croatia and in Albania, they have Devas as well, with slightly different pronunciation.
Oh, excellent.
And also after the coming of Islam in the 7th century, they were also adopted or integrated into Islamic lore too, although they weren't originally part of that culture. Now, you mentioned the Manticore. We both mentioned the Manticore. Manticore is another creature. It's a legendary Persian beast, sort of similar to the Egyptian Sphinx.
Okay.
The Manticore is said to have the head of a human, the body of a lion, and a venomous tail of a scorpion. So try to picture that. And interestingly, the Iranian Manticore proliferated all over European medieval art because maybe of the influence of the North Iranian Sarmatians, Scythians, the Alans, Roxolans. We talked about those people previously who settled, Europe during the decline and fall of the Western Roman Empire. And there's actually one very interesting, if you look these up, and they're all over the European bestiaries, they're called, which are sort of fanciful encyclopedias of mythological creatures.
Right.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one very interesting picture of a Manticore wearing what's called a Phrygian cap, which is particularly interesting because some of your listeners may recall from our previous conversations, the Phrygian cap was always associated with Parthians and Iranians in Roman art and then later European art. So it's interesting that they even though this is a fanciful creature, they knew where it was coming from, so they gave it an Iranian hat.
Right. But Phrygia is like in the Balkans somewhere, right?
It's in the Balkans, yes. Yeah. But the Phrygians at the time were part and parcel of the Sarmatian culture.
Right. It was the same hats, but the Europeans gave it the European name.
Yeah. And so during this time, the Iranian world was ruled by Parthians, who are Scythians,
right,
not by Persians. So it's complicated, but broadly speaking, they're all Iranic. So now, having talked about some of these evil types of creatures, Devas and dragons and Manticore, there's a good class of creatures called, in Persian it would be pronounced Pari or Peri. These are good creatures by and large. They're essentially good, although they can be a little mischievous.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're described as being exquisite, winged spirits renowned for their beauty. They're described as, like I said, mischievous, having been denied entry into paradise until they've completed some penance to atone for some sort of sins that they may or may not have committed.
So they're not exactly mischievous angels, though. Maybe they're more like your sprites or your fairies that.
Exactly. That's what they are.
They're friendly, but they have strange senses of humor.
Like pranks on you,
right.
Something like that.
In fairness, they have an entirely different frame of reference. Being a supernatural, preternatural creature.
That's right. They don't share our exact morality here.
Right.
And the parallels, obviously, you can hear in the word, is the European side, in the European culture family, is the fairies.
Mm-hmm.
Fairies and fairies. In fact, the word may have entered the European languages through Ottoman Turkish and Romanized as fairy. Now, there's a couple specific examples in the European side that I'll mention. One of them is called the Swan Maiden, where the human in this particular story, the human male hides the fairy's wings and marries her.
Aww.
Yeah, and there's also a work known as Paradise and the Peri by Thomas More, based on these Persian spirits.
Well, Thomas More is a pretty well-known guy.
Oh yeah, no, he is. He's a good, I think, both a critic and a poet. Something like that.
Yeah, he's and wasn't he on the good side and the bad side of some kings?
Yeah, who was it, right?
Yeah, about true.
And then
me.
You, yeah. They also entered into the world of Islam again after the coming of Islam. Peris were adopted by the Arabic and Muslim world as well, where they were known as kind and benevolent beings, in contrast to the mischievous jinn, or genies,
right,
which were already present in the Arabic world. And at some point, I'm not going to talk at all about the 1001 Nights lore here because it's slightly different. It comes partly from the Arabic world and the Indian, but it's so complex that we can have another conversation about it there.
Well, consider it done.
Excellent. Yeah, Aladdin and
sure.
Baba and all of that stuff that we've all grown up with.
Yeah, well, that's all. I mean, 1001 Arabian Nights is way pre-Islamic.
Oh yeah, exactly. The stories. That's the thing. Is you got me talking about it. I'll say one thing about it, but I won't get too deep on it. Is that they came to be known as the Arabian Nights in Europe because they were brought to Europe by the Arabs.
Right.
But they themselves, the Arabs, compiled a lot of these stories from previous Indian, Persian, Jewish, Mesopotamian, even Greek, even some Turkic stories. So it's very, very cosmopolitan.
Yeah, that sort of Mediterranean circle was, you can, there's about 1 million different peoples from there because they all were named after their towns and cities and other things. But
right.
But there's a ton of overlap there. And for those of you who are very religious, especially very religious Muslims, I understand that nothing's pre-Islamic because Allah was always God, and then all of it. I'm just saying when people were enlightened and realized that the message came from Allah, when they gave it a name, not that it didn't exist before.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. People who come from I don't want to get you killed here, but
I wish my show was important enough to get me killed.
People who are very, I guess the word is fundamentalist within their own traditions. Have a hard time accepting that, some of those elements came from traditions prior to or outside of. To me,
we'll say pre-Muhammad because that's pretty much agreed upon that was around the 7th century AD. I mean, so.
Yeah. To me, it doesn't even take away from the psychological truth of something. In fact, it adds to it if you know that other cultures have come to the same thing. But anyway, we'll leave that aside.
Yeah, I'll buy that for $1.
Two levels of analysis, right? The people usually from within a tradition who try to interpret things by within their own narrative. And then there's the secular outside historian who comes in and wreaks havoc.
Yes, of course.
So, all right. So enough of the Perrys or fairies. And I'll tell you about a couple of giant birds.
Yes.
The Seamorg and the Homa birds. So the Seamorg, also known as the dog bird, was an enormous winged creature with the head of a dog, a body of a peacock, claws of a lion.
Okay.
Sometimes also imagined with a human face on top of all of that.
Yeah, I'm losing track of my mental image at this point.
Yeah. The Seamorg lived high in the Alborz mountain range, which is in northern Iran, bordering the southern coast of the Caspian Sea.
Okay, I was just about to ask that.
Yeah. And Tehran kind of actually is on the foothills, the southern foothills of the Alborz mountain range. If you go over the range, you're suddenly in the Caspian Sea.
Gotcha.
So Seamorg lives in that region, lives for about 1,700 years, it said.
Oh.
It's said, until it gets old eventually and dives into a fire of its own creation,
Okay.
only to rise again.
Sounds familiar.
Yes, like the later the phoenix.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was either derived from it, or both of them are derived from an even older Proto-Indo-European tradition. We're not sure.
Right.
But clearly, it's the same bird with some cultural variations.
I wonder if there's a comet that appears every 1,700 years or something like that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Like Halley's Comets sort of thing, but every 1,700 years.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably not. And I mean, I don't know if there's been humans tracking these things long enough to know that's a pretty long timetable. But I don't know. Some of those ancient cultures, I mean, I don't know how they track these things, but they did.
Well, I'll tell you what. I am beginning to become more and more going down the rabbit hole myself, watching YouTube videos of Atlantean stuff, so on and so forth. I sort of cut my teeth on and grew up on very sort of abstract interpretations of mythology by Joseph Campbell,
Sure.
and of history by Will Durant, so on and so forth, where everything is sort of interpreted as your own psyche. And while I still appreciate that, I'm beginning to think there might be actually more physical truth to some of these things.
Sure.
More great
Why choose?
historical truth, which would make it extremely interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, the Seamorg possesses a lot of great wisdom, features prominently in a story of the hero Zal, who raised Rostam, the greatest of all Iranian heroes. We'll get to actually shortly. And then there's another bird called the Homa bird. The Homa bird is a later version of the Seamorg, apparently. Said to fly eternally over the earth, never lands. So it sleeps up there, does whatever the Homa bird does up in the sky for its entire life. And if its shadow falls on an individual, that person's blessed.
Oh.
And will have nothing but happiness for the rest of their lives. But conversely, if you injure it, or even attempt to injure it, or if you even think about attempting to injure it, you'll die in 40 days.
Oh, 40. Well,
40 days.
that's a common number as well.
Yeah, very biblical.
Yeah. What does that? Well, pre-biblical, obviously. Anyway, what are the physical attributes of the bird, or is it just a giant bird?
On this one, I don't know if it looks any different than the Seamorg, but I might be wrong.
So it might have a dog head with a human face and a peacock body and all.
Yeah, the Seamorg had all those things, and the Homa. When I see, because there's a lot of artwork in Iranian and Persian literature that depicts these things, and they're depicted differently all the time, depending on the era. I don't think I've ever seen a depiction with all with the human face and all those things, but they're sort of always a gigantic bird with some of the characteristics of other creatures.
Now,
sort of
one day I'm going to do a show about peacocks and just like the imagery of peacocks in different cultures, because the peacock, I mean, obviously it's a pretty distinct looking animal. It doesn't seem to be afraid of people. The cock version at least is beautiful, and the feathers look like eyes. So I mean, there's some obvious things, but the peacock is like everywhere. And I actually one of our repeating guest, Andrew Goff, I was going to task him with that, but he picked Tartarian instead, and I certainly can't turn away Tartarian for peacock imagery. But
no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
That's funny. No, it's the peacock is a very interesting bird, and how funny that it's the male that it's showing off. That's common with birds, in fact.
Most animals. It's
most animals. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. The Homa was responsible for, or came to be known as sort of associated with legitimizing kingship as well. There are sculptures of the Homa, by the way, giant sculptures all over Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the First Persian Empire. If you ever look them up, it's quite impressive. In fact, also I should mention, it also came to symbolize the concept of sort of elevation of mind or enlightenment, you could say.
Sure.
And
like an ohm.
Like C. Morgan. Go ahead.
Like an ohm.
Yeah. Like C. Morgan, the later Phoenix, the Homa was thought to live an immensely long life, and again, like the other two, it dies in its own flames and gives birth or rebirth to itself.
So it's not like the Midgard serpent. It does have a life cycle.
It has a life cycle, very long, obviously.
Besides Ragnarok.
Yeah. By the way, it's also the symbol of Iran Airlines. It's a very cool logo if you ever check it out. And we Iranians who are sort of against the current regime there are very, well, I guess we're happy about it, but we're surprised that it hasn't been replaced, because it's clearly a pre-Islamic, what they would consider a pagan symbol.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that they haven't replaced it, because it's a beautiful symbol.
This is probably not exactly the right show for it, but you would probably know better than anyone else that I know. Like, this is January 8th, and there was a lot of coverage about what was going on in Iran for a while. It seems to sort of simmer down some. Is there still a lot of civil unrest? Is what's going on there?
Yeah, no, it's listen, it'll die down and go up, and here it's whack-a-mole, right? I don't know when exactly anyone who claims to know is fantasizing this regime will fall, and how that will come to be, hopefully in an as non-violent a way as possible.
Of course.
But I will tell you, having grown up in this culture, that as a culture, as a civilization, Iran is done with Islam, not just the Islamic Republic, at least absolutely done with the notion of a theocracy, right? If you want to practice your religion in the privacy of your own home, that's fine. But especially the younger generation, when any sort of surveys that have been done, despite the fact that you're taking a risk when you're answering a survey.
Of course.
Despite all that, the majority of Iranians consider themselves non-religious.
Right, secular.
Yeah, secular, and not, in fact, more than secular in a political sense. They actually don't. They're not religious.
Yeah, I've been hearing polls like that. I don't know, go probably 2 or 3 decades now.
Yeah, more and more so. And so, in a sense, maybe civilizationally, they say, what's that old expression about? They asked someone in the early 20th century, "What do you think about the French Revolution?" He said, "It's too early to tell." So maybe the same thing here is that as destructive as this revolution has been, and the war and the sanctions and so on and so forth and all that's come from it, that maybe civilizationally Iran had to go through that. Some have said that. But in any case, I don't know what will happen with these particular set of protests, but I think Iran civilizationally is over theocracy, and to a large extent over the religion that was imposed on it, in a sense, by the sword 1,300 years ago.
Yeah. Well, okay.
So that's my view of it.
Yeah, I didn't mean to really put you on the spot, but I figured, it could enlighten us a little bit. B, I said it's January 8th, but I don't know if I said the year. It's 2023. This is a podcast, so people could be listening to us in 30 years and go, what's he talking about? Or why is he talking about it now? Yeah, and C, I wish I was clever enough to come up with things like it's too early to tell, 110 years later. I mean, that sounds like something William F. Buckley would say or something. But
right.
But I'm not.
Yeah,
so back to monsters, or not monsters, but supernatural beings. Maybe,
Yeah. So now, in fact, speaking of supernatural, I want to. You have a good sense of between the dragons and the Deeves and the birds and manticore. Of the creatures. Now I want to mention for the final part of our talk here, a few humanoid mythological beings.
Sure.
One of them is we'll start with, and again for this, I hope I'm not repeating myself here, but I'm scratching the surface of Iranian mythology. It's one of the world's large civilizations and has an extremely complex and deep and wide kind of mythological galaxy. So hopefully this will be just enough for people to go to Google and look up things and buy some books and watch the videos on their own if they're interested.
Well, you working on the Iranian cinematic universe?
Yeah, well, in fact, I'll mention that at the end.
Oh, okay, great.
So I want to mention one of these heroes, mythological heroes, is named, and when I say mythological, it may be semi-historical, we're not sure, primordial times. His name is Jamshid, or sometimes Yamshid, if the J is pronounced, is silent. So Jamshid appears in both the Zoroastrian scriptures and also in the later Shahnameh, that epic poem that I mentioned.
Right.
Jamshid is in the Shahnameh. He's the fourth king of the world, of the world. Actually, I was going to say of Iran, but in the Iranian mythology, it's of the world.
Sure.
He commands all the angels and all the demons, and he serves both as the Shah and also the high priest. And Jamshid is responsible for a number of inventions and discoveries. He's credited with manufacturing arms and weapons, weaving and dyeing clothes, linen, silk, wool, building materials, mining jewels, precious metals. He's said to have invented perfumes, as well as the art of medicine.
Okay.
The man got around.
Right, so he's like all of the characters in the song Atlantis by Donovan. He's like all the 12.
I haven't heard that one. I know Donovan, but I haven't heard that song.
Oh, it's great.
I'll have to check that out after the show. Yeah, the art of medicine and navigation, sailing ships, and music. Oh, and last but not least, he's credited with discovering, or I don't know if you invent wine or you discover it, but wine.
Oh, so he is a one-man pantheon of gods. He's a one-man, all the attributes of Atlanteans or any other root culture that spread all of everything that's worthwhile to the world, or the Masonic tradition, all of the useful stuff, or the stuff that made us
all these basic, most important things, and it tells you what they considered most important things in civilization. Or wine is one of them. Music is another. That's good.
I should start drinking again. What's wrong with me?
Exactly. And so we don't know if that actually happened, but it is interesting, I will say, going to actual history now, that the oldest traces of wine in the world that have so far been discovered are in two places. One is in Iran itself, and the other is in the Caucasus, which in ancient times was the homeland of the Iranian Sarmatians.
Okay, there you go.
So we have traces of wine, so who knows? Maybe it was Jamshid.
So are you saying that the Italians and the French and now Californians are culturally appropriating the vintnering of wine?
Those wannabes. Absolutely.
Or is like in when you go down the rabbit hole of the Atlantis YouTubes, everything was done by the Phoenicians.
The Phoenicians, yeah.
Yes.
Well, the Phoenicians, were great seafarers. They transported a lot of these things.
Sure, right, yeah.
And okay, so Jamshid, in addition to doing all of these things, he also had a flying throne.
Nice.
He sat on a jewel-studded flying throne, carried by who? By the Deves, who I mentioned before. Who serve him, and they raise his throne into the air and fly him through the sky.
Very nice.
If that's not enough, Jamshid also has a 7 ringgit cup. And it's not just a cup, but this cup has both the elixir of immortality in it, and also allows him, when he looks into it, to observe the entire universe.
You know, this might explain why Thor's chariot was drawn by goats, because the Deves sort of had those horns as opposed to horses, because certainly the origins of Thor being Indo-European, they knew what horses were, and knew that they were better at carrying a chariot than a goat would be, but maybe it came from that.
Were unavailable too, Jamshid had them, so...
No, that's true, that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. So he in this Jamshid's cup, it's the elixir of immortality, and it gives them the ability of, I guess you could say, remote viewing.
It's very Grailian.
Very, absolutely. No, that's an absolute real connection there. Now, again, whether one of them comes directly from the other or both of them. Let me put you on mute for a second until this fire truck goes by.
Yeah, I hear that. We're glad to know it's not his home.
I live in the city, and it's not quite as bad as Manhattan, but it's almost. So, what were you saying? Before we were so rudely interrupted by...
I was just letting the audience that we're glad to know it's not your home that they're responding to.
Yeah, no, hopefully.
Yeah, we were on Grailian.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so, or whether they both stem from their common, Proto-Indo-European, who knows, but they're clearly a part and parcel of the same complex here.
Sure.
Speaking of Jamshid, I also want to mention a concept which is very important in Iranian sort of ethos, mythos, mythology, the concept of Far, F-A-R-R, it's often spelled, which is sort of similar to the concept of divine grace, which you hear about in Christianity later, right? And so Jamshid has this concept, this divine grace bestowed upon him for most of his reign. But then he becomes a little bit too full of himself and begins boasting too much about how everything comes from him, no one else.
The pride.
And yes, the pride before the fall, right? And so this concept of Far leaves him, and he comes to a rather bad end, but I won't get into the details.
Right. So
Jamshid also, by the way, invented Nowruz, which is the Iranian New Year.
Oh, okay.
It's on the 1st of spring, and throughout the Iranian world, it's the biggest holiday in the Iranian world, from Tajikistan to the Caucasus to the Balkans. It's claimed by many countries. It's UNESCO has it registered under many joint countries who celebrate it. And according to Iranian mythology, that tradition goes back to Jamshid.
Is there a fixed date in, I can't remember if we're on a Gregorian or a Juliana calendar, or is it sort of like the Jewish holidays where it's different every year?
Yeah, it's sort of like the Jewish holidays in the sense, because it's the beginning of spring, and so the hour changes. It's usually around the 21st of March, but the specific exact moment changes.
Okay, I was gonna try. I was just wondering if it had anything to do with, tied into his, the original Jesus birthday.
Oh, interesting. Well, no, that's the birth of Mithra, right?
Right.
So, the birth of Mithra is around this winter solstice, which we talked about before. But this beginning of spring. So the Indo-Europeans and the Iranians specifically, but Indo-Europeans generally, celebrated sort of the beginning of each of the seasons, the different equinoxes and solstices.
Right, sure.
But the one that's still celebrated, most prominently throughout the Iranian world is the beginning of spring, which is considered, and that's a good time, to call the beginning of the new year, because winter is coming to an end, and now you have the flowering of spring.
Sure.
So it's just logical.
Absolutely. And now I've got to do the same disclaimer I did before to everyone who is a devout Christian. I know that Jesus was always there, and that the name just came later, and and identifying. So we're just talking about dates going with the story, not that God was not eternal. The God of the Christians and all the Abrahamic religions was not eternal. We just put names to it later. So that's my caveat. I can't imagine I'm going to walk into this many more times this show, but you never know. If anyone can do it, it's me.
Sure.
I'm like Tom Cat. I'll step on rakes and hose and things, and then the wood shaft will keep hitting me in the head.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm a dangerous host, or a guest, I should say. I get you into a lot of trouble with the...
Yeah, no, I can take care of this on my own. Don't worry. It's not you. It's not you, it's me.
Okay. I'll mention one last thing before we get off of Jamshid, is that Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire, the first Persian Empire, is often called or referred to in popular parlance or culture as Takht Jamshid by the Iranians themselves, meaning the throne of Jamshid.
Okay.
And so Western scholars, these silly Iranians, they forgot that this was actually it was built by the historic Cyrus and Darius. They think it's built by this legendary Jamshid. Well, no, that's not what happened. The Iranians knew who it was built by, but Persepolis was also the site where the New Year celebrations were held each year.
Right.
It was sort of its primary function. In fact, in the sculptural friezes that you see all across Persepolis, you see them bringing the New Year's gifts, including wheatgrass and such. And so that's why, in the popular culture, it's called the Throne of Jamshid, because of its association with the New Year. But I thought that's the last thing I'm going to say about Jamshid. But if you know the poet Omar Khayyam, the mathematician, astronomer, 12th century Persian poet Omar Khayyam and his Rubaiyat, one of the most famous poets in the world, was even the most famous poet in the English language for a time period in the late 19th century when he was translated by Fitzgerald. Has a couple of little short poems that reference Jamshid. They're 4 lines, so I'd like to read them here. Can you still hear me? You're on.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. One of them says, "The lion and the lizard keep." Sorry, they say the lion and the lizard keep the courts where Jamshid gloried and drank deep. And Bahram, the great hunter, the wild ass stomps over his head, but he cannot break his sleep. And the second one is, "Iran indeed is gone with all its rose, and Jamshid's 7 ringgit cup where no one knows, but still the vine her ancient ruby yields, and still a garden by the water glows." So very sort of romantic era.
Yes, gardens by the water, the whole thing.
Yeah. There's a Norse equivalent, apparently, too, to Jamshid, at least according to some scholars, like a gentleman named Ottinger, who claims that Jamshid, which again can also be pronounced as Yamshid, is the equivalent of the Norse god Ymir.
Oh, okay.
So there's that. Now, the second hero that I want to speak about is Rostam.
Yes.
Rostam is maybe the quintessential Iranian hero in Persian Iranian mythology. He's sort of the equivalent of Hercules. Yeah,
Rostam I've heard of before we started on this endeavor.
Really? You knew? Yeah. There's a famous poem. Well, I'll get to that in a moment. In the English language, too, that it's based on. So I wonder if that was where you heard of it.
Probably.
So Rostam is he's said to have the strength of several elephants.
Of course.
He's loyal to the Persian throne, but often on his own terms. He's sort of a wild man who comes in and helps reluctantly, but then goes and does his own thing. He's not fully under the control of the Shahs.
Like a Beowulf kind of type.
A little bit, yeah. Very similar in that way. By the way, when we speak of Rostam, almost always in the same phrase, there's Rostam and Rakhsh. Rakhsh is his horse.
Oh, okay.
His steed. And Raksh is a hero in his own right, you know, and he's actually the only horse in the world who's strong enough to carry Rostam.
Oh, well, good. It's good they found each other.
They found each other, and they're a team. They face demons and thieves together, and so on and so forth.
I mean, imagine if they didn't.
Rostam has the 7 labors that he's associated with, similar to Hercules.
Yep.
In Hercules, it's 9 labors. Rostam has 7, and I won't get into them in detail, but they include fighting various thieves, sorcerers, surviving the desert heat, surviving Arctic temperatures, all these sorts of temptations, and so on and so forth.
It's amazing they knew what Arctic temperatures were. I mean, I guess it isn't amazing, but still, how often did it get cold?
Well, very cold. You keep in mind, people. First of all, even Iran today, it's a mountainous country with extremely cold climates. But the Iran of the day, we're talking about Scythian lands that are Central Asia. So
right.
It's as far north as Canada.
Right. Look at the Russian tanks bogged down in the snow right now in Ukraine. Okay. Yeah.
Ukraine, yeah. So if the Ukraine and between north of the Black Sea and north of the Caspian Sea is the area we're talking about, that's about as, and these are plains, right? So it's as cold as it gets. Well, I'll actually come back to that in a moment.
And of course, in the journeys, their ancestors and probably still, missions and whatever embassies, went through the Himalayas and the all the various mountain ranges there. So
well, the Urals in this case would be the big the Caucasus Mountains, the Alborz Mountains, the Ural Mountains are sort of where these people lived.
Yeah, so that was just me being a big dummy. Okay.
No. I'm glad you brought it up because a lot of people will associate Iran with like a hot Middle Eastern country. It has big deserts. It has very severe deserts, but it also has lush valleys and forests and has mountain ranges. And again, the Iranian world that we're talking about in ancient times is much vaster than that and includes parts of what today is the Caucasus and Ukraine and Russia and the Stans.
Right. It's more like North Texas than it is like Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, no. In fact, parts of it are like Canada, Jeff.
Ooh.
Yeah. We're talking about north of the Black Sea. This is cold country. And if you look on a map, it's about as far north as northern United States, southern Canada.
All right, there we go.
Yeah, amazing. There's a lot of similarity between one of these labors, as they're called, the 7 labors, and the story of Percival, in the Arthurian tradition.
Yep.
And in fact, the Grail Temple is very strongly reminiscent in its description to an actual Iranian site called Azar Goshtasp, which is a Zoroastrian or maybe even pre-Zoroastrian Mithraic Indo-European temple in northwest Iran in the province of Azerbaijan. Sometimes it's referred to as the Throne of Solomon today, but that's a much later misnomer. After Islam, they tried to sort of make everything biblical so they wouldn't destroy it, but it actually has nothing to do with the biblical tradition. It's a Mithraic Zoroastrian Indo-European temple, fire temple.
Okay, cool.
So there's the 7 labors. There's also a great tragedy that he's associated with, maybe one of the great tragedies in Iranian literature, called Rostam and Sohrab, where he inadvertently slays his own son.
Right. Also like Hercules.
Does Hercules do that too?
Yeah, like he was in like some sort of poison or drunk or stupor, and then accidentally, like he's like enchanted by maybe Hera, who never liked him, and accidentally killed his whole family.
Wow. Yeah. In fact, Matthew Arnold again, and I wonder if this is where you heard of Rostam or if you had heard of him from the actual Persian source, wrote a poem in the English language called, instead of Rostam and Sohrab, Sohrab and Rostam, which is based on, it's not a direct translation, but it's based on the same story, the tragedy of Rostam and Sohrab.
It definitely sounds familiar. No, I think I sold them the horse.
Right. Okay, great. Then there's also, I'll leave you one other final story about Rostam before we move on from him. Rostam lives to be a ripe old age of, I don't know, 600 or 700 years, if I remember correctly. But when he is an older man, still a hero, still Rostam, but, an older Rostam, suddenly there's an episode in the Shahnameh where the Shah at the time, tasks a great new Zoroastrian prince named Esfandiar with going out and bringing Rostam in, as they say, like bringing him to heel, because Rostam has just been, he's not been following orders, and it's, he's in one of those moods, right, where he's not listening to what the Shah wants, and the Shah has had enough of it. Esfandiar is has the magical powers where he is considered basically impregnable. He's invincible, very much like Achilles.
Okay.
And so Esfandiar goes out reluctantly because he respects the old Rostam. He doesn't want to do it, but he's tasked by the Shah to go and bring in Rostam. So he goes out and says, Rostam, this is what I have to do. Would you please come in without us having to fight? And Rostam says, no. How dare you speak to me that way? After all I've done for the kingdom, how many times have I saved Iran and the kingdom? You're talking to me, you foolish young man. And so they have a battle, and Rostam is unable to defeat. Amazingly, he's unable to defeat this invincible new prince.
Right.
And he goes and prays to Zal, the magical, to the Seymour, the magical bird. And Seymour says, look, this prince is invincible except for his eyes. So just like, Achilles had the
heel, right, where he was dipped.
It wasn't dipped because he had to hold him by the heel, right? Esfandiar's vulnerability are his eyes. So Seymour creates a special, instructs Rostam to create a special two-headed arrow from the wood of a special tamarind tree dipped in a special formulation, and Rostam uses it and kills Esfandiar the next time around.
Oh, that's not nice.
And this whole episode is considered by those who interpret these things to be really a personification of a battle, a cultural battle that was going on in the Iranian world between the old school Scythian Rostam, because Rostam is from Sistan. He's considered to be from the Scythian side of the Iranian family, pre-Zoroastrian, pagan, Mithraic, kind of Aryan cowboy, right?
Right.
And Esfandiar represents the new Zoroastrian, civilized, urban kind of culture that the Iranians became when they moved to Mesopotamia, right? And so it sort of reminds me of the tradition we have in cinema of the Western, where the railroad and civilization is encroaching on the cowboy figure, who is doomed. His days are numbered, but wants to maintain his independence till the last moment that he can. Rostam is sort of that Indo-European cowboy figure.
Right, he's John Dutton in Yellowstone.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I don't know who Indiar is, or but we get the idea.
Yeah, you get the idea, and so it's very interesting to see these two characters kind of representing the Zoroastrian side and the pre-Zoroastrian pagan Indo-European wild man sort of ethos of the Scythian side.
Right, and he had to blind the new one to get over on.
He had to blind him. That's the only way. Yeah. And again, so the similarities, obviously, they're the obvious similarities to Hercules that you also mentioned, but it's also been said that there are similarities to other Indo-European heroes, like in the Irish tradition, there's a hero called, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, Cuchulainn. And also in the German tradition, there's a story of Hildebrandeslied, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So, and that's very similar to the Rustam and Sohrab tragedy where he slays his son.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, those Irish names. They are almost never pronounced the way that they look.
Yeah, no, I'm sure I'm butchering it, but the coup is spelled C-U, so if somebody wants to look it up.
I wish I could give you the correct pronunciation, but I cannot. But luckily, I have booked a guest on Celtic Tales, so hopefully I'll remember to ask him about that if it doesn't come up. So that's coming up. Yeah, that's right, folks. Garden of Doom, we've got you covered. When we come up with questions, sometimes we already have the answers booked, or we're going to get you the answers.
Indeed, the audience helps. So we have a couple more here. The next figure that I want to talk about is Kaveh Ahangar, or Kaveh the Blacksmith. And he fights a character called Zahak, the Demon King.
Okay.
So who's Zahak? Zahak, the Demon King, is a incarnation of basically Ajidahaka, that dragon, a personification of him.
Okay.
In the Shahnameh. He has a snake growing out of each shoulder.
Why not?
And so Zahak has to feed these snakes. It sort of reminds me of like interpretation of what a addiction would be, right?
Yeah, interesting.
And these snakes need to be fed, and so for years he's had 2 innocent children kidnapped from the population that he governs and killed, and their brains are fed to the snakes to keep the snakes from devouring his own head.
Okay.
If they're not fed each morning, they'll eat his own brain.
Talk about a curse. Wow.
Yeah, it's outrageous.
He's king of the demons. He's king of the demons. It sounds like he's on the lower rung of demons. He's fighting himself.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, yeah, exactly. Well, that tells you something psychologically, that even the most powerful have their own demons, right?
Oh yeah, you're right.
So Kaveh the Blacksmith and Feridun are the heroes who finally end this guy's reign. They storm. In fact, Kaveh the Blacksmith has 3 of his own children were killed by Zahak, and their brains fed to these snakes.
Well, there's the motivation.
Motivation. He leads a popular uprising. People have had enough. They storm the mountaintop castle that Zahak lives in and slay Zahak. Kaveh has sort of become a symbol of Iranian resistance against foreigners in general, but specifically against Muslim invaders.
I feel like the common but strong blacksmith turning into hero of the people, has sort of become a trope. Though I can't picture any of the stories necessarily, but I feel like I've seen this before.
Yeah, no. Look, it's common again in the European tradition. The blacksmith is sort of associated with a magician figure in a way, because it's not too dissimilar from alchemy.
Right.
What they're doing, right?
Right. You turn them into
that's what I've read.
Right. And also they'd be strong. They're hammering that thing, and they're in they get calloused from all the heat that they're used to, the fire and all of that stuff, and they got to wash all the soot off every day. But yeah, the big armed man working hard for his money.
Yeah, sort of archetypal manly man, right?
Right, but not noble. But provides things to the noble. So he's sort of like on that middle ground where the nobility needs him, but he's not noble.
That's right. He's from the people more working class, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's such a thing in Iranian culture, very famous, called the Derafsh Kaviani. Let me put you on hold for 1 second here. Sorry about this.
Well, emergency services are circling over there.
Yeah. The Derafsh Kaviani, or the Kaviani Standard. Are you back on?
I am.
Can you hear me?
I never left.
Okay. I'm back on.
Yes.
All right. The Kaviani Standard, or flag, which is actually originally was his own modest blacksmith's apron. And it now is associated with the whole concept of resistance. And in fact, you were talking about the demonstrations in Iran going on today. You will see if you look at any of the footage. You may not pick up on it because you weren't familiar with it, but oftentimes in the demonstrations, particularly outside Iran, because they can do it more safely, demonstrators unfurl a giant Kaviani flag, which goes back to this blacksmith's apron. So you see how much these stories are still within the psyche of the people.
Well, I'm going to look for that now.
What's that?
I'm going to look for that going forward.
Yeah. In fact, I can send you something after the show. The Kaviani standard, and it sort of looks like a cross, but you can also tell that it's very sort of primitive and blacksmithy and apron-like.
Oh, very cool.
So we've talked about a lot of men, but don't forget that at least in the ancient Iranian tradition, women were very powerful. And
that's right.
In fact, the quintessential example of that are the Amazons, which are thought to be mostly based on the Iranian Sarmatians in the Balkans. And the Greeks would often make fun, of the Persians for being sort of, what would they say, under the thumb of their women. And the women were, in court anyway, were controlling the men. And that might have something to do with the fact that the Greeks in that era were very patriarchal, and the Iranic tradition, at least particularly the North Iranic tradition, because they were less urban and more, equestrian. The women were equal to men, and they fought alongside men oftentimes. Maybe not quite the extreme version that's presented in the Amazon stories, but oftentimes they fought alongside the men, and that's probably where the stories come from.
Yeah, they found quite a number of Scythian and even as far as further east of warrior women buried with their weapons, as well as other things as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I was just reading about exactly that about a third of the graves that they've dug up so far, it's warrior women rather than men.
Right, and also they had even if they weren't on the front lines, there was a lot of, they had to protect the village, the home. I don't know if the village is the right word, but the towns, the cities, homes. They were Absolutely. Subject to attack and flanks, and if the attack went wrong and there was a retreat, and so they were absolutely multitasking.
The Sarmatian Iranic women, particularly, and the Scythians, keep in mind, because these were equestrian people who used the bow and arrow as a primary way of warfare, that if you're using a bow and arrow, a woman can be just as good, even if she may not have quite the same upper body strength as a male, although some would. It almost equals things out.
That's right. We saw Wonder Woman. We know.
They were. Say it again.
We saw Wonder Woman. We know.
Exactly, Wonder Woman. In fact, I think we talked about this in one of the last conversations. There was a BBC article recently that I was very happy to read, that it clearly brought back the Wonder Woman legend to the Sarmatians.
Yeah, I mean, the bow does most of the work. I mean, I guess right. the it's not string. It would be sinew or something. That would be the string part of it. But yes, you have to build up strength to pull it back. But people build up strength.
Exactly. And so, this tradition of women warriors is exemplified in one particular hero named Ghorda Farid. Ghorda Farid, a female Iranian champion and warrior who fought against Sohrab, the son of Rustam, who at the time was a commander of the Turanian army. The Turanians are to the Iranians kind of what the Trojans are to the Greeks.
Oh,
They're always fighting.
I gotcha.
Yeah. And there's a little passage from the Shahnameh that describes her, where it says that when Ghorda Farid learned, the situation is there was a fortress that was an Iranian fortress that was under attack by these Turanians, and when Ghorda Farid learned that their leader had allowed himself to be taken in a cowardice way, she found his behavior so shameful that her rosy cheeks became as black as pitch with rage. And with not a moment's delay, she dressed herself in a knight's armor, gathered her hair beneath a steel war helmet, and rode out from the fortress like a lion eager for battle. She roared at the enemy ranks and declared, "Bring on your warriors, your tried and tested chieftains."
It's like Lagertha and Vikings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so don't mess with the Iranian warriors, particularly Gordafari.
That's right.
And to this day, she's a symbol of courage and strength for Iranian women, especially those fighting the oppressive Islamic Republic in Iran today, as I think the whole world sees very clearly on their televisions almost every day now.
Wow, now I don't regret bringing that up earlier because, again, that wasn't really the topic, but it seems to have woven its way into a lot of the conversation anyway, naturally. So
Absolutely.
It's almost like I planned it, but I didn't.
Jeff, what's going on here is that you have a culture that has two eras, the pre-Islamic and the post-Islamic, and there's a bit of a schizophrenia, and there's a conflict between those two sides. And maybe you could say that during the Shah's time, Iran leaned a little too heavily against the Islamic religious tradition, and that caused a backlash. Well, now Islam is causing its own backlash. And so what you're seeing are moments in a large civilizational change that's occurring where the pre-Islamic Zoroastrian Indo-European culture is trying to reassert itself and come to the fore after having been not just, symbolically, but militarily suppressed for centuries.
Right. Well, one of the things that's probably common to all peoples is that there's extremists everywhere on both sides, or whatever side you want there to be, and it takes an awful lot for the centrists to be mobilized into action, and probably from a historic view, it always seems like it's too late, or why did it take them so long? But that's because they're not extremists.
It's no, that's right. There's, by definition, right? It's
yeah.
Yeah, no, listen, I think these things cannot be resolved unless they actually come to respect each other to some extent and incorporate some elements of the other, right?
Right.
Otherwise, it'll be a battle that will go on forever. So I'm really hoping, I'm not sure what exactly the solution is, but I'm hoping that whatever the solution is, it'll be without too much bloodshed, and that it'll allow the Iranian people, not just in Iran, but if that regime falls, the domino effect that it can have across the region.
The entire world gets better. Against
political Islam. I have no problem with anyone's religion. I mean, I have personal problems with all kinds of religions. But I don't want to prevent them from having any religion. But I do want to make sure that they're not able to enforce it and impose it on others.
Right. And we being I'm American. You're dual Canadian and American.
I'm Canadian. Well, I was born in Iran, but I'm also a Canadian citizen, and I live here as a permanent resident. So I'm at home, sort of or not at home in any of the countries.
Right. So I will just say we in America, meaning me at this point. But obviously Darius lives in America, so we have our own flirtations with threatened theocracy. So even if it sure and people with theocratic, they rarely think they are. They think that they are reasonable. And that's sort of an eternal conflict. And well, anyway, I don't want to get into that too much, but we certainly echo your thoughts.
Listen, I totally agree. Certainly we have a dichotomy going on in our own culture here right now, for sure, between the left and the right, and the Trumpsters, and on and on. We won't get into that, but this is not anything new.
Yeah, especially today, January 8th, 2023, there's a little January 6th going on in Brazil right now. And, it's...
Oh, interesting, with Bolsonaro?
Yeah, it's American anti-exceptionalism has spread to, well, a different part of America, if you want to be technical on this or accurate. But let's just say United States anti-exceptionalism has spread to the largest South American country as well. So, swell.
Yeah.
So proud.
It's amazing what's going on there between Lula and Bolsonaro and the back and forth.
I'd love to say it's amazing, except that they're just copying us. I mean, it's just, I mean, this is not what's supposed to be meant by world leader. But again, this is Garden of Doom reserves the right to meander in all directions. But I don't want to steal the thunder and have people remember we're talking about politics or whatever. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce her name, but was our heroine the last hero on your list?
There's actually one last that we'll end with, and that is Arash Kamongir. My first name Arash.
Yes.
The bowman, the archer.
Nice.
And he is an archer, and he lays down his life by sort of infusing his arrow with his life force.
Oh.
Yeah. So in the epic existential, you could say, battle between, again, the Iranians and the Turanians, very much like the Greeks and the Trojans, over the so-called royal glory. In this episode, the Turanian general Afrasiab has surrounded the forces of the righteous Iranian Shah, Manucher. And so to prevent further bloodshed, the sides come to an agreement that whatever land falls within the range of a bow shot or an arrow shot will be returned to the Iranians, and the rest will fall to the Turanians. And so at night, an angel, Spenta Armaita, helps the Shah Manucher to construct a special bow, a magical bow, an arrow. And Arash, who's a simple man from a village nearby, is chosen to be the archer. And the next morning, Arash travels to the top of Mount Damavand, which is just outside Tehran. It's actually the highest volcano in Asia.
Oh.
In Iran's Hirkanian forest, just south of the Caspian Sea. At the break of dawn, he lets loose the miraculous arrow. And the arrow travels, and it travels, and it travels from dawn till dusk. And when it finally lands, it splits a tree in the farthest reaches of Central Asia. So these Turanians had thought, oh, well, how far can an arrow travel, right?
Right.
The next morning, when Arash is sought out by the population, it's said that his body has simply vanished, and that all that remains are his clothes and his bow. So that actually reminds me a little bit of the penultimate Luke Skywalker, penultimate Star Wars film, where Luke Skywalker's body disappears, and all you see is his cloak.
Yeah, that's true. The sacrifice, for the greater good. Exactly.
For the
right.
greater good. Yeah.
Yes.
In contemporary culture, Iranian culture, there's a Tirgan festival that's named after this event. It's still celebrated throughout the Iranian world as either Tirgan or Tir actually meaning arrow. And by the way, Tir is also etymologically related to the Indo-European cognate Thor, which you brought up before. So there's that.
Oh, that's
and of
right.
Course,
Tir.
Arash is still a very popular Iranian name, including my own first name, which I still use, and my friends and family know me primarily as Arash.
Okay, well, now I have to call you Arash. I mean,
there you go.
We're friends now.
Well,
come on.
We're friends now. Yeah, I answer to many things.
A man of mystery. All right, well, Arash, Darius, whatever you want to call yourself. Where can the folks find you, find your stuff? We talked about the Persian version, obviously, but you have a very robust Facebook presence. You are an author, so you have books. So prop your stuff.
Yeah, I'll end with where they can find more on this mythology and also more on me.
Perfect.
If they're interested in finding more on Persian and Iranic mythology, I would recommend, first and foremost, the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. There are many, many translations in all the major languages of the world, including English. Particularly, if I had to recommend one, it would be any translation, even a prose translation, because it's very hard to translate poetry. So you often have abridged prose translations by Dick Davis. And also there's a complete unabridged version published by Columbia University. It's Center for Iranian Studies in Iranica. And there's also a movie I would recommend that you can check out on IMDb called The Last Fiction. It's a very high budget, high production value animated feature called The Last Fiction, which is about one of the stories from the Shahnameh about the Kaveh the blacksmith and Zahak the Demon King, who we just discussed.
Mm-hmm.
Really well-made animated feature that I highly recommend. Also, the last thing I'll recommend is there's a traveling theatrical production, sort of a shadow show / puppet show that's been going around North America, Europe, and Asia called Feathers of Fire. Also based on stories from the Shahnameh. And in fact, Francis Ford Coppola, no less, wrote, he saw the production 3 times, he liked it so much, and he ended up writing a preamble to it.
Oh, very nice.
And as far as me, well, I'm easy to find online. I have the Persian version podcast on Anchor and multiple other platforms. On Facebook, you can look me up by my name, Darius Kamali or Rosh Darius Kamali, and also under the Ariana Facebook group, which is all about Persian, Iranian, Iranic culture, history, anthropology, and now sometimes a little bit of politics.
Yes, and I will tell you that the Darius posts on there prodigiously. There's probably no less than 5 to 8 posts that he puts on there a day. He's on various things between art and history and characters and religion and current and whatever it is. So if you're worried about a Facebook group that isn't active, as the administrator, he makes sure that it is active and there's plenty of content for you. He does much better than I do at Garden of Doom, which I probably post one thing a day, or 1 or 2 things a day tops.
By the way, Jeff, I forgot to plug my books.
Of course. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks for giving me this opportunity. Yeah, during the pandemic, I've had a little bit of time on my hands, like a lot of people, and so I actually put out 3 books as well that are all available, certainly on Amazon and on KDP, but now in some of the other retailers have picked them up as well, like Barnes & Noble. So if you look up my name, Arash Darius Kamali, on Amazon, they will all come up. The 3 titles are Dog Whistling Dixie Past the Graveyard, Mistakes of Identity, and most recently, Sacred Cow Tartar. They're all available basically anywhere that you look up online. If you look it up on a different site than Amazon, they will purchase it from Amazon, so it doesn't really matter. Just put in my name or the name in any of those books, and it'll lead you to the same place.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for giving us this presentation on mythology, heroes, folklore, whatever folks want to call it, intermeshed with history and current affairs, and sort of tying the Indo-European roots to present day. And folks, like I said, if you like hearing Darius, you of course can check out his podcast and the 2 shows he's done here before. And then the good news is we were already planning to do a future show on the Kurds, and now it looks like he's booked himself for 1,001 nights, or
We'll have to figure out the date on that. Sure.
But I never want to overburden anyone, or have the audience listen to the same person too often without there's occasional exceptions, of course, but anyway, thanks again, folks. Thanks for tuning in. If you like the show, please share it with your friends. Please give a rating and a review. Garden of Doom does have a Facebook page, not a group, but it's a page, but feel free to go there, and you can certainly make comments there. I'm pretty interactive, and also if you want to find me on Twitter, it's at IcarusFellMD, and if you follow me, I'll follow you, and if you interact, I will almost certainly interact, as long as you're not a complete meanie pants. Even though this is Garden of Doom, it's the rules are unilateral. Anyway, thanks again to Darius. Thanks for all listening, and we will hear from you again, or you'll hear from us next week in the garden.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been fun.